So, okay, well, welcome, as we said, to the second of our Curious Histories charity online history lectures, celebrating the kookier and weirder elements of history. And tonight we have my good friend and self-confessed film nerd, Linsay McCulloch, who is going to talk to us about I Know Where I'm Going, which is, I'm sure, as Linsay, I'm sure, will explain, is one of the sort of masterpieces of 1940s film. And Linsay has already entertained us, of course, with a talk in person at St John's, when that was Johnny Guitar back in December last year. And that was so richly entertaining that we've invited her back to do something online so that a wider audience can appreciate her magnificent take on kind of film history. But this one is, you're kind of going back to your roots a little bit here as well, aren't you, Linsay? Because this is obviously a film that's set in Scotland, and you're going to talk a bit about the sort of the myth and the folklore as well as the sort of cinema history, or at least that's what I'm hoping for anyway.
Yeah, no, I'm doing an avant-garde performance piece that you've never considered. No, that is exactly what I'm doing, Stu. I'm talking about I Know Where I'm Going, the myth and magic of this amazing film.
Splendid. Okay.
And yeah, maybe afterwards we can have a chat about how many people have seen the film.
Yeah, with plenty of time, I hope, for Q&A at the end. So I'm just going to leave it. It's over to you now, and I will kind of mute myself, and we'll just sit back and enjoy.
Okay. Cheers, Stu. I'm just going to share my screen. Oh, yeah. Classic rookie error there, but this is the first screen. I hope everybody can see the screen and still hear me, but please do let Stu know if that's not the case. Yeah, I'm just going to minimize the faces so that I can see the full screen. So my talk tonight is called The Mermaid's Wedding Dress. It's about I Know Where I'm Going. I think an absolutely sublime love story from 1945. Set in Scotland, as Stu said, and really focusing a lot on the myth of Scotland as an imaginary place, and the magic that's there in the film, both in the way the film's made and in what it's saying. So a bit of background, first of all. It was written, produced and directed by these geezers. So that's Michael Powell on the left and Emmerich Pressburger next to him. Theirs was a long-term partnership. They worked together in films from 1939 really up until the 1960s, but they had a formal partnership under their film company, which was called The Archers. So I said to some people a couple of weeks ago, whenever you see this roundel at the start of a film, it means that you are in for a treat. All of their films had this credit, written, produced and directed by the two of them. And it was a very kind of collaborative process. Michael Powell mostly did the directing. Emmerich Pressburger mostly wrote the screenplays and did the producing, but it was a total collaborative effort between them, their crew and their cast members, and they used the same people time and time again. So we'll see some of that. Just a bit of context about the film industry in the 1940s. As you can imagine, during the wartime, a lot of films about patriotism, lots of propaganda around. So one of the biggest films in 1942 was In Which We Serve, very heroic film about serving servicemen, and a kind of an accident at sea, a boat that goes down. So loss of life, sacrifice, very kind of key wartime themes. People were used to watching newsreels, so a lot of fictional films as well had that kind of documentary style realism that would be what people would expect to see at the cinema. Lots of focus on women's role women's roles during the war, especially in the home front and the war service that women did. So The Gentle Sex is a film that follows 6 or 7 women when they are kind of doing their war work and working together. And similar to that is a film called Millions Like Us, which is very much that kind of collective effort. We're all in this together. We're all going to win the war together. Again, focusing in the main on women's contribution to the war effort, but really, again, about sacrifice, about making do and mend, about pulling together to win the war. So that was the context. But Powell and Pressburger always did things slightly differently. So these are stills from their 1942 film, The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp. And there are 2 main actors here, Roger Livesey and Anton Walbrook, both playing young and old versions of themselves, hence the four pictures. So in some ways, Colonel Blimp is a patriotic film, but its message also was kind of slightly unpalatable at the time, certainly to Winston Churchill, who wanted it banned. So Colonel Blimp is an Englishman. Anton Walbrook plays Theo Kreutzmar-Schuldorf, who's a German. And the story is partly about their friendship. So in 1942, we've got a film about an Englishman and his best friend, a German. Again, you know, quite an unpalatable message. In the later stage of the film, Theo is a German refugee from Nazi Germany. So again, the film is kind of suggesting that Germany is an occupied country by the Nazis, that not all Germans are Nazis. Again, not a very popular message. Its main message, though, is that this war is different and that we can't rely on those old English stroke British, but mostly English ways of the old school tie, the stiff upper lip, the Marquis of Queensberry rules. This film very much says we may have to lose a bit of ourselves if we're going to win this war. And is it worth it? If we do that, is winning the war worth it? So you could see why Churchill is just not going to be into this at all. A similar film, well, similarly for their films in 1948, this is The Red Shoes. Many of you will have seen this. It's a film about a ballet dancer. And in the film, she's in a ballet called The Red Shoes, the story of which is that these shoes are enchanted and she dances to her death. So in 1948, London is still a bomb site. Many other cities are still bomb sites. There's still rationing in place. People have come back from the war having seen terrible things. There's been death and destruction rained around. What other filmmakers were doing was presenting a very optimistic post-war view. It's going to be great. There's going to be consumerism. There's going to be American culture. There's going to be hedonism. There's going to be optimism. And what The Red Shoes says is, despite all that death and destruction we've seen, this is a film where we're going to persuade you very, very cogently that it's all right, it's fine to die for your art. In fact, it's good to die for your art. So again, that's just slightly off message. So politically and socially, they're kind of off, Powell and Pressburger, but also the way they make their films is kind of off as well. So British cinema at the time, I'm just going to read this, was described as understated, unsensational, true, anti-fantastic, restrained, and un-Hollywood. Well, Powell and Pressburger were certainly un-Hollywood, but nobody would call them anti-fantastic, nobody would call them restrained. So these are another 3 films from around that period. This is Black Narcissus, which explores kind of sexual repression in a convent in the Himalayas. And this great kind of still shot of an actress called Kathleen Byron, who plays a nun who goes mad. This is An Escalator to Heaven, in the genius that is A Matter of Life and Death. Now, no one's calling that unrestrained. This is a film called A Canterbury Tale, and again, there's flights of fancy in this one. So this has a prologue which is set in the 14th century with Chaucer's pilgrims on their way to Canterbury. Most of the film, though, is set in current 1942, 1943 Kent, with 3 modern day pilgrims on their way to Canterbury. Not kind of traditional pilgrims, but they all get the equivalent of a miracle at the end when they visit Canterbury Cathedral. So again, very kind of fantastic way of looking at wartime England. I've chosen this shot because if any of you have seen Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, you'll know there's a very, very famous shot where a prehistoric ape picks up a stick as the first weapon and twirls the stick round, throws it into the air, and then there's a jump cut to a satellite thousands of years later circling around the Earth. Well, I might suggest that Powell and Pressburger did it 25 years before Kubrick in this scene. So we have a 14th century falconer. He throws up his falcon, there's a jump cut, and then that falcon is now a Spitfire plane flying over the Kent countryside in 1942. So they are visionaries, I think. And this film that we're looking at tonight, I Know Where I'm Going, is no exception, if you ask me. Martin Scorsese says that there's many points of comparison between me and Martin Scorsese, but he said, I reached the point of thinking that there were no more masterpieces to discover until I saw I Know Where I'm Going. And he's a massive Powell and Pressburger fan and has done a lot to kind of revive their legacy and their reputation, and in fact to restore their films. But the plot of this film, for people who haven't seen it, is that we follow Joan Webster, played here by Wendy Hiller. She's a very modern young woman and she's planning a very modern marriage to Sir Robert Bellinger, who's the chair of Consolidated Chemical Industries, the company where she works. We don't know what her job is, but we know he's the chair, we know he's old enough to be her father, and we know he's incredibly rich. So she's planning this very, very modern marriage where she will get to be Lady Bellinger, she'll have wealth, she'll have status. At no point is it suggested that she's in love with Sir Robert, but this is going to be a modern marriage. She's on her way to an island in the Hebrides called Culloren, where she's going to marry Sir Robert. He's rented the island for a couple of years. Partly it seems to be kind of safely away from the war, but he's got the money to do that. So she's traveling to meet him there and they're going to get married there. She gets as far as Mull, and then her journey is halted by fog and she can't get any further. She can't get to Culloren, the island. While she's stranded there, she meets this person who is Torquil McNeill. He's the real Laird of Culloren and trying to get home. He's on leave from the Navy. He's handsome, he's young, but he's also poor. And this is the last thing that Joan needs. She does not need any obstacle in the way of her plan of becoming Lady Bellinger. It soon becomes clear, though, that Torquil does have the potential to be an absolute kind of pearl in her oyster in terms of getting her there, grit in her oyster. And so she determines that at all costs, at whatever risk to her own life, to other people's lives, that she's going to get a boat across regardless of the weather. And she bribes a young sailor to take her across. The weather turns and they get caught in the Corryvreckan whirlpool, which is a real whirlpool, a real maelstrom, here in the film off the coast of Culloren. And so there's a kind of certain danger to life and limb that happens later on in the film as well. So that's the plot, but I mentioned that their films, Powell and Pressburger's films, were different, and I Know Where I'm Going is no exception. If we look again at Millions Like Us, and we contrast it with I Know Where I'm Going, even just the titles, Millions Like Us is a collective, it's us, we're working together, and there are millions of us. It's a huge joint effort to win the war. Just in its title, we've got two versions of the word I. So Joan is very individualistic, she's very materialistic, not for her, this kind of collective notion of we're going to win the war together. She's going to win her individual war, which is she's going to marry rich and she's going to have an easy life. And that's what she's interested in. So during the war, when women wanted to marry, I mean, clothing was rationed right throughout the war and right until 1947. So when women wanted to get married, they made do and mended. They made something out of another dress, or friends and family would pool their clothing coupons together to allow the bride to get something new to wear. This picture is actually from the Imperial War Museum. This is an actual wedding outfit that was worn by a bride, I think in 1941 or 1942. This is what Joan has to the right of this picture. This is a new white satin wedding gown. And there are certainly questions about how she got this and how Sir Robert Bellinger has been able to kind of prepare her trip for her, has been able to source things like this. I mean, he's a very wealthy man, but even wealth couldn't always guarantee that you would get what you wanted. The black market generally could guarantee, if you had wealth, that you would get what you wanted. So there's this thing about Joan's wedding dress. Has she come by it honestly? Is it a reasonable and noble thing to wear when you're getting married in wartime? Joan does not seem to grapple very heavily with these issues. She loves her dress, and it becomes quite a symbol for her, quite a totem for her. So in this scene that I've taken the picture from, she's in a train compartment travelling from Manchester to Glasgow. This is the first leg of her journey. And she looks at her wedding dress again just before she goes to sleep, with the result that she has a dream. And in her dream, she's wearing her wedding gown, and she's marrying not the person of Sir Robert Bellinger, she's marrying the company. She's marrying Consolidated Chemical Industries, in this kind of funny scene where actually, you know, the priest says to her, "And do you, Joan?" And she says, "I know." And he says, "Do you, Consolidated Chemical Industries?" And a kind of factory whistle blows to indicate that the industries, yes, do you want to get married to Joan? So this, and the whole of that scene is filmed through the plastic that her wedding dress comes in. So there's this film in front of the film, in front of her dream, that we're seeing. And this is how totemic this wedding dress is for her. So you might think from what I've described that this is a straightforward love story. You know, she's on a journey, she meets somebody else, her heart is turned. And it could certainly have been made like that in 1944 and 1945. But this one isn't. Scotland is presented as a very mysterious place, a very mythical place. So we get legends, we get the tale of a Norse prince, which is the legend of Corryvreckan. We get curses. This is Moy Castle, and Torquil, who we've met, his family was cursed generations ago to never cross the threshold of Moy Castle, or some terrible fate will befall him. So we find out at the end of the film what this curse is, but Torquil has never been in this castle. His father has never been in this castle, his father's father before him. So this idea of Scotland again as this kind of mysterious place where curses happen. And this is a picture of the actual Corryvreckan whirlpool. It is, as I said, a real place. And what it's here to do, so there is a kind of very dangerous trip that they will take to try and get past this whirlpool. But what this underlines is that in legends, in myths, in fairy tales, if we look at the story like a fairy tale, they're not always hearts and flowers. There's generally a darkness to them. There's generally a vengefulness to them, something kind of dark at the heart. And that certainly kind of comes out in this film. One of the other things is that Scotland is this mysterious place. So this is partly in Joan's dream of Scotland. She's got no real idea of what Scotland is, no real idea that it's a real place with people or with poverty or with any of that. This is how she imagines it in her dream. And it's quite difficult to see on this picture, but these are hills and mountains that are covered in tartan. This is what Joan's seeing as part of her dream. And at the bottom, we've got her train going through the tunnel to take her to Gretna Green. She's crossing the border into this mythical, dreamlike country. And the reason this is hard to see, the lights that are at the top right-hand side of that photograph there, that's the plastic from her wedding dress cover. So this, again, is all through the lens of she's going to be Lady Bellinger. And this is what her wedding dress is telling her. So just on the subject of Scotland being a mythical place, I'm going to show you a clip now. And this clip is, Joan has gone to visit somebody in Mull called Rebecca, who lives at a house called Arnacroich, I think. And Rebecca is telling her about what Scotland used to be like before the war. Joan has gone there with some friends of Sir Robert Bellinger's, this English family called Robinson, who seem to care very little, it must be said, for the Scottish history that's being described. And Torquil happens to be there as well because he knows Rebecca. So again, Joan and Torquil's paths are crossing. So this is the first clip. It seemed to work earlier. I hope you can hear it, but let me know if not, and perhaps there's something we can do. But I hope you can all hear this.
Have you ever seen any Highland dancing?
No, never.
You ought to see our Oban gathering in peacetime. Of course, it's not so big or so famous as Braemar or Inverness, but it has its own quality. You came through Oban?
Yes, the harbour was wonderful, and that lovely green island.
Imagine it, full of yachts, big and small. And there's racing and Highland games all day. And at night, they give a ball. You can't imagine what a wonderful sight it is. The assembly rooms are all hung with special hangings in dark red. And the women wear tiaras, those that have them. And the place blazes with jewels. The men are more splendid than the women. With their velvet doublets and scarlet waistcoats, their lace cuffs and jabots, their buttons of gold and silver, their cairn gauns, their buckle shoes, and their fillybergs of every shade and colour. And the pipes play, and we dance all night, till the sun shines through the curtains.
Lovely. What does fillyberg mean?
The kilt. It really means the little kilt is worn nowadays.
Now, what about bridge? Joan doesn't play. Do you play, Mr. McNeil?
No, I'm sorry, no.
So you can see there that the English family, represented by the Robinsons, care not a jot about what Scotland used to be like or the glory. And in many ways, those days are gone. Scotland now belongs to people like the Robinsons, who will come up and rent someplace. Sir Robert Bellinger, who will rent Torquil's whole island for 3 years. And Torquil says, if he rents it for 3 years, I can live there for 6. So these are the kind of Highland economics. And this dreamland that Rebecca is describing, for the most part, is gone. Except, if only there was a way for Joan to see these splendid men, resplendent in their kilts and fillybegs. And of course, he's standing across from her. This is what Joan is seeing when Rebecca is describing this image of Scotland. And I mean, that's brought out in that clip that we saw, that kind of glance that passes between them. Torquil is the Laird of Culloren, and this means that he often gets called Culloren, and we'll see that in another clip that we'll show later on. So this notion of there's the island, there's Scotland, there's the land, and then there's Torquil the man, and he is standing in front of Joan. So that link that Torquil is Scotland, Torquil is the island, he is this idea of Scotland, and he's living and breathing, and he's standing in front of Joan. When Joan, at the start of the film, is talking to her father and saying that she's engaged and that she's going to go to Scotland, and he says, oh, that's a long journey, and she says, oh, everything's arranged, it's all arranged. And this is kind of a theme. Joan also hears it in her dream with the tracks of the trains. She hears, everything's arranged, everything's arranged, everything's arranged, everything's arranged. And for Joan, that means all her plans are coming together. Everything that she has put in place is going to happen. And this is shown by this incredibly detailed itinerary that Sir Robert or some of his team have created for her. So she gets on at Manchester, she gets to Preston at this time, she'll get to Glasgow at this time, she'll be met, she'll be taken to another train. There's another page of this, there's 3 or 4 pages of this itinerary. And on the next page, it says, the train will wait for Miss Webster. So all the way along, she's getting this kind of first-class treatment. Things are being arranged for her to get to Culloren. As soon as she gets to Mull and her journey is stopped by fog, she takes out this paper itinerary to have a look at it. The wind picks up, pulls it out of her hand, dumps it in the sea. So this, it's all arranged, it's all arranged, it's all arranged. Joan is starting to feel that maybe she's not the mistress of her fate as she had kind of previously thought, but possibly something else is being arranged for her. Some other destiny is being arranged for her. And that comes out in the film, that Joan is not in charge. So This next clip I'm going to show you kind of moves again into the realm of superstition. The fog is very, very heavy. They need the wind to lift this fog so that she'll travel the next day to Culloden and she won't be stuck anymore on Mull. And Torquil says to her that there's a superstition that the first night you're in a house, they've taken refuge at the house of one of Torquil's friends, Katrina MacLean. The first night you're in a house, if you count the beams in a room, you can make a wish and it will come true. And this is what Joan does. Once more, the wedding dress.
Who is it?
It's me. I've just been outside. It's much clearer. With luck, we'll be able to cross in the morning.
Oh, thanks for telling me.
See you in the morning.
Good night.
Good night. You see the trees now. In half an hour, you'll be able to see the shore.
In half an hour, I shall be asleep.
There's a grand view of Culloden from here, the northeast end. At sunrise, the light shines on the sands of Belnahad Bay. With a glass, you can make out the people walking about. Have you got a match or a lighter? Thanks. Thank you. Are you engaged?
Yes. I'm going to be married on Culloden.
It's an honor for Culloden. Well, may your pulse beat as your heart would wish.
Thank you.
Is it to be soon?
Tomorrow, weather permitting.
Have you got any beams in your room?
Yes? Why?
Count them before you go to sleep and your wish will come true.
As easy as that.
Only the first night under the roof.
People in modern houses don't know what they're missing. Good night.
I warn you, it doesn't work if you don't believe in it.
Please, Lord, don't let the wind drop and let it blow the fog away.
So Scotland has already changed Joan because she's moved from being this very kind of practical, matter-of-fact, determined person to, yeah, all right, I'll count the beams if you think it'll make the wind blow. She couches it as a Christian prayer, so she's not entirely left her old self behind, but she counts the beams. But this is her first time at wishing. This is her first time in a fairy tale. She doesn't know there's a price to pay for wishes. She doesn't know that they might come true to the letter of the wish, but that doesn't necessarily mean you'll get what you want. So she wishes too hard, and now she can't get to Culloden because the wind is too strong. To me, I've seen this film countless times, at least 20. I realised today that when she blows out her flame, that's when the wind starts. So to me, there's always something that new that you can see in this film. We kind of know her wish is not going to go quite as planned, though, because when she sees that kind of gargoyle in the middle of the beams, it's got its tongue sticking out. It's a very kind of trickster god. It's not going to give her exactly what she's after. So if there are kind of fairy tale elements to this film, so there's a journey, there's a quest, there are obstacles, there's magic, there's superstition. But one big thing about fairy tales that I want to talk about now is generally there's a double. There's the beast and the handsome prince. There's a good woman and there's an evil woman. There's a blonde and there's a brunette. And Joan has a double in this film who's called Katrina. And she's an old friend, implied an old flame, actually, of Torquil's. But she's now married to an English guy called Potts, and she lives in this old house in Mull. This picture on the left is the first time that we see Katrina. She looks like some kind of nature goddess. She's clearly at one with the land, with nature. She's got these massive dogs. She's got this kind of wild mop of long hair. And when they meet, you can see those contrasts again. Joan has this very neat little short haircut, very practical for her work during the war. Katrina's hair all over the place. Joan's wearing a utility suit, so utility wear during the war was kind of hard-wearing fabrics, and the style meant that you would use less fabrics, so kind of not pleated skirts. Men's lapels were smaller, very hard-wearing. It would last for years. Joan's got her utility on, but she's also got a very, very fancy ocelot hat and a handbag to match. I don't know if you can see what Katrina's got in her right hand, but it's a rabbit. It's a rabbit that she has shot and that she's going to skin for supper. So they've both got this kind of fur, this animal skin, but Joan's is a very cityfied look and Katrina's is a very kind of country look. And they're kind of contrasted throughout a lot of the film. Katrina plays quite a major part in the plot, actually, in bringing Torquil and Joan together. And at one point, I mean, Katrina is poor. She is very poor. Their house is all run down. She's dreaming of the day when she might get some money from the RAF who've been living in her house and what she might do with that. And Joan said to her, well, you know, if this house is such a burden and the land is such a burden, why don't you just sell it? And this is when Katrina tells her money isn't everything. Now, this is news to Joan because in her life, this is exactly what she's trying to get, exactly what she wants, which is money and privilege and power. And Katrina is kind of saying to her, no, there's another way to be. So this whole kind of doubling is a way of underlining that kind of myth and fairy tale aspect of the film. This next, I've got another clip for you. So Joan and Torquil have gone into the village to try and make radio contact with Culloran so that she can speak to Sir Robert. And while they're there, they hear about the legend of Corryvreckan.
The legend of Corryvreckan?
It's the second biggest whirlpool in Europe. It lies northeast of Culloran, just off Scapa. Corry means cauldron or whirlpool. Brecon was a prince of Norway. He sought the daughter of the Lord of the Isles in marriage.
Hello, Polestar, hello.
Go on.
The Lord of the Isles refused to give away his daughter.
Because he was a Scotsman.
Except on one condition. Prince Brecon must anchor his galley in Corryvreckan for 3 days and nights.
What was the catch?
The catch was that he thought he would be drowned. It's a terrible place. When the tide's running, whirlpools form, and you can hear the roar for miles. And that's true, you can hear it from Killoran.
I bet he anchored, though.
What he did was to go straight back to Norway. There, he asked the advice of the old men. They told him to take 3 anchor ropes. One of hemp, one of... Wait a moment, one of... Flax. Thank you, Mrs. Beaton. One of flax.
And you'll know well what the third rope was made of, Killoran.
Of course. The third rope was made of the hair of maidens who were faithful to their lovers.
Go on.
The maidens willingly gave their tresses, and Prince Brecon sailed for the Hebrides. The first night, the hemp rope broke. The second night, the rope of flax, Mrs. Beaton's rope, broke. The third rope held fast. The third night...
Hello, Tobermory. Hello, Tobermory. Isle of Killoran speaking. Isle of Killoran speaking. Over to you. Over.
So they will end up at Corryvreckan later on. And what this legend does is it very quickly links success or failure at Corryvreckan with a maiden's fidelity and faithfulness. So we know that Joan's faithfulness is going to be tested and that this is going to have something to do with Corryvreckan. Another thing I really love in this clip, actually, is that this woman and her husband, presumably, they just talk in Gaelic, and there's quite a lot of Gaelic in this film that just isn't translated. And so Joan obviously has no idea what any of this means. Torquil has to act as translator for her sometimes. But you will often find this in Powell and Pressburger films. There's just little bits happening that don't really have anything to do with the plot, but they add to the kind of the overall atmosphere of what the films are. And there's loads of examples of that in their films. And again, maybe this is something that's relatively different between them and other filmmakers of the time. So I think there's magic in this film, not just in what it's saying, not just in what it portrays, but in how it's made. So in 1944, 1945, Powell and Pressburger were kind of at the forefront of technology and what was available in films at that time. So in the Corrie Vrecken sequence, we see Joan here, a lot of that is back projection. So similar to green screen, something would be playing in the background and actors would be acting in front of it. They use superimposition, where two images are kind of imposed on one on the other to create a filmic effect. So here we see Joan. She's thinking about trying to get to Culloden, but she's also thinking about this Ceilidh that she and Torquil attended, which was like the first intimation that there's a love story developing between them. And she sees her plans kind of coming to nothing. She's trying desperately not to make that happen, but she's got these two competing thoughts in her head. And that's what this is telling us. It's not just Joan who has a double in Katrina. So this is Roger Livesey, the actor. And this is not Roger Livesey, the actor. Roger Livesey was committed to working in London. He was on a West End play and he couldn't get away to Scotland. So most of this film, ravishing though it looks, a lot of this film was filmed in London using backdrop, using rear projection. But some of it was actually filmed in Scotland. Whenever we see real Torquil, real Roger Livesey, we are seeing fake Scotland. And whenever we see real Scotland, we're seeing fake Roger Livesey. This is his stand-in. And he hired this stand-in himself. He taught him how to like match his gait, how to match his movements. And so Roger Livesey has a double, but also Scotland has a double. Scotland is this imaginary place because a lot of it is filmed in London. And the magic is not really limited to the technological aspects either. This film looks beautiful. These photos I'm showing you are not kind of publicity stills. They're actual just kind of production. You could stop the film at any point basically and you're going to see something amazingly beautiful. And this light and dark, this black and white photography by their cinematographer Erwin Hillier, who again, somebody they worked with quite a lot. These shots are just amazing. He uses light and dark in a way that is really quite exceptional. But these shots, these beauties, it's not just about the cinematic visuals. It's not just about the beauty. There's also a plot angle to them as well. So this is Joan on the threshold of Moy Castle before she goes in. And you can see it's very kind of fairy tale threshold. There's light behind her. She's going into a dark place. An hour later in the film, exact same shot for Torquil as he enters the threshold. So the cinematography is used, yes, to look beautiful, yes, to be kind of technologically advanced, but also to advance the plot, to say that these people are destined to be together. And then we come to the major kind of action set piece in this film, where they try to get to Culloden going across Corrie Vrecken. This is Joan, Torquil, who comes along to try and kind of prevent any as little damage as possible, and Kenny, who's the young sailor that she's bribed to take them across. And again, this is kind of cinematic mastery for the time. They used back projection. They used footage from the real whirlpool that Michael Powell, the director himself, had filmed kind of the summer before. When we see the actors, they're in a water tank at Denham Studios in London. When we see Torquil especially, that's true. And they also used scale models. So it's this huge technological vision coming together to make their kind of political vision, their narrative vision of trying to cross Corryvreckan. We've seen already that Joan's wedding dress is this massive symbol to her. It's how she becomes Lady Bellinger. It's how she gets the wealth and status that she wants. So of course, she takes her luggage as they're crossing the sea to try to get to Killoran. And the storm is so bad, the boat runs into trouble. There's real kind of danger to their life and limb. Of course, the suitcase flies over the side, hits the water, the bursts open, the wedding dress falls into the water and sinks down in its lovely plastic. And the last symbol of her being Lady Bellinger has gone beneath the waves, and she knows that that is not what life holds for her anymore. They survive Corryvreckan and they go back to Katrina's house, and while they're in the safety of that there, Joan says, "I wonder what will happen to my wedding dress." And Torquil says, "A mermaid will get married in it." And Joan has been in Scotland for so long that she totally accepts this and just says, yeah, that sounds right. That's probably what's going to happen. She's come a long way from the kind of very practical person that she was before. So I've got one last clip to show you, and this is the last kind of aspect that we're going to be looking at. So Joan's fate has not been in her own hands, but neither has Torquil's. And towards the end of the film, he decides that he's said goodbye to Joan. She's off to Killoran. She's decided she's got to go. She's got to marry Sir Robert Bellinger. She's gone off with the 3 pipers who are going to play at her wedding. And he decides in his despair that he's going to go into Moy Castle and he's going to see what this curse is. He doesn't mind if he's cursed because Joan has gone from his life.
Before she died, the woman cursed Killoran and every future MacNeil of Killoran if they should ever cross the threshold of the castle. There's the curse, carved in stone on the ramparts, there to this day. It's a terrible strong curse. It goes. This is the curse of Katrina MacLean of Eric. My curse on MacNeil of Killoran and every MacNeil after him, if he shall ever cross the threshold of Moy, never shall he leave it a free man.
So that sound is Joan coming back with her 3 pipers that were due to play at her wedding, but she's coming back to Torquil instead of getting married. And the end of the curse is that he'll never be a free man. He'll be chained to a woman till the end of his days. The chains of matrimony, of course, for Torquil and for Joan. So in this fairy tale, the poor working girl does get her Prince Charming, or at least her Laird Charming. Her aim was to get from Manchester to Killoran, but the island is as mythical as the rest of Scotland. We don't see it in the film. They never get there in the film. But as we've seen, Torquil is Killoran. He's called that. He's the island personified. So Joan didn't actually know where she was going, but she got there in the end all the same. Thank you.